One of the problems that I have with a lot of the press surrounding products, and products is a wide gamut here, so we're going to ultimately focus our conversation today on software products, but basically what I'm getting at, because these ideas apply to any type of product. So a product could be like an iPhone, or it could be a computer, or it could be a burger, it could be literally anything. It doesn't really matter. These ideas will still apply. But one of the things that I don't like, it's kind of funny that I said burger, because this sort of terminology doesn't really apply to people making burgers. I guess at one point it did. But it's this idea of the visionary, or this person kind of sitting on high on this pedestal who has this grand vision that they have for a product. And while that stuff can be fun, and it definitely gets people excited about stuff that other people are working on, it can also have sort of a negative effect. So it gets us into this position where we think that there's this other person independent of us, or more specifically, that we can't have a vision, or that there's some thing, like some way that you have to be ordained in order to have a vision for a product, which is just not true. Anybody can have a vision for a product. It's just understanding what exactly a vision is. And there's going to be endless definitions for what a vision actually is. But in my personal opinion, and one that I think applies to, or should apply to a lot of the people listening to this, is that a vision simply means being able to clearly define some point in the future and then moving towards it. That's it. In the most simplest sense. It's literally saying, it'd be kind of cool if I could do that. And then kind of, and depending on how your brain works, either reverse engineering from that point and figuring out what the steps are leading up to it, or if your thinking is clear enough, just starting back and saying like, okay, well, if I wanted to get there, what would be like the first thing that I have to do? And you can do this with anything. Like, we'll simplify it down to, if I wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, what do I have to do? Well, first I have to have bread, and I have to have peanut butter, and I have to have jelly. So if I don't have those things in the cabinet, well, I got to go to the store and I got to go get bread and peanut butter and jelly. Okay, that's part one. So we're moving toward our vision of having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, I bring those things home. What's the next step? Well, and if you want to get really nuanced, you can say, well, I need to take the bread out of the package, and then I need to take off the lid and the protective film on the peanut butter and the jelly. And then I need to get out a knife, and then I need to do this, and then I need to do that. And even though it's something simple, it's just lunch in the form of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that was a vision. And now I kind of want a peanut butter and jelly. I haven't had one in a while. But that's the basic idea at play here, is there's nothing special. It's just saying, oh, that'd be kind of cool, and then making the steps necessary to move toward it. Now, where a lot of people get kind of clumsy with this, or where they get tripped up, is realizing just how long it takes for certain visions to become a reality. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, factoring in time to go to the store if I don't have the ingredients, maybe an hour at most, right? To make the trip there and back and then put everything together. Maybe an hour. To do something like what SpaceX is doing, where you're trying to build rocket engines that can propel humans to Mars and beyond and wherever else, a little more complicated. And so I see a lot of people make this mistake with software, but this applies to literally anything, is certain visions just require a little bit more time. But the principles are all the same. All it is you saying, that'd be kind of cool, and then moving toward it. And in the process, being patient about getting there. So if you don't have the skills that you need, or you don't have the resources, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. That doesn't deter you. You just say, okay, that's where I want to go. And then you start making steps toward it. So that's the basic idea, or at least that's the way that I think about a vision. Now, that's the kind of the high level idea at play here, but there's more to it. And I think there's some sort of a framework, or at least I personally have a framework that I like to follow when it comes to thinking about a vision that I might pursue. And one of the first places that I start is with the why. So I'm sure that a lot of you have come across either a YouTube video or on a podcast, this fellow Simon Sinek. So I think he wrote a book called Start With Why, but he also has like a talk, and there's a lot of videos kind of riffing on his general idea of starting with the why. And I think this is a super important concept to apply to building a product or having a vision for a product. And so what I mean by the why is, why this problem? Why do you want to solve this problem? Like, why do you want to build a product to solve this problem? And what this allows you to do is really figure out what your motivations are, but also figure out whether or not you're pursuing something that actually matters to you. So what I mean by that is, for me, I'm working on a product called Command right now that solves the problem of all of the different tools that you need to manage a SaaS product and the costs involved with that. And so the why for me behind that is, I got frustrated in the past, deeply, deeply frustrated by having to spend all this money and managing all these different tools, and it generally just being a mess, and being in the position of kind of like an early stage founder or somebody who's just kind of like our audience here, the indie maker set. Like you're an individual or maybe two people, and you just don't have the resources to juggle all of these tools, let alone pay for them. And so that was the why for me, is that's incredibly frustrating when you want to build something good and you know what the tools are that you need, but they're a little bit out of your reach, or it's at least cumbersome to have all those tools. And so you find yourself having to cut corners. So that's my personal why for why I'm working on Command. And it's not this grandiose thing. It's not this amazing, virtuous, like, oh, wow, he's saving the world. It's not about that. That was a frustrating enough problem for me to say, yeah, I'm going to spend some time on that. One, because it sounds interesting. It's something that like really frustrated me, and it's a problem that I still need solved. But also because it's fun. It's something that I enjoy thinking about. Maybe that's geeky to you. Maybe that's, something that other people aren't excited by. But for whatever reason, the process and the logistics of managing a software as a service application, for some reason, my brain's like, hell yeah, dude. Let's spend 16 hours a day working on that. That sounds like a blast. So there's those two things. And then the third and ultimately the important one, because it's kind of what decides where this goes, which is, well, that sounds like a viable business. Like in my head, when I think about it, it kind of pieces together. It's like, well, not only do I enjoy thinking about the problem, and do I have some expertise around managing a SaaS and building SaaS products and all that stuff, but also like, yeah, that sounds like a problem that other people will have, and I'm willing to pursue it and go after it. Now, contrast that with someone who says, I'm gonna build a car for managing car dealerships, but I've never worked at a car dealership. So the problem with that is that you're basically getting into this situation where you don't fully understand the domain, or and I should unpack that word. So you'll often hear like the product domain, or do you understand the domain? And domain just basically means the context within which the product is going to be used. So going back to that example of a car dealership. So if you're going to build software for a car dealership, it stands to reason that you're going to have some experience selling cars. Because otherwise, you're going to really struggle to understand, well, what does a car dealership need? And I know there's the whole lean startup movement that kind of got people hyped up on the idea of like customer interviews and all that stuff. But I kind of push back against that idea, because personally speaking, when I've worked on something or I've tried to learn something, the difference between me at the beginning with zero knowledge versus me even a year in or 2 years in is completely different. And the things that you see in your head and the connections that you can make are completely different versus, someone who's outside of that domain or doesn't have any experience with the thing. And there's a good quote I came across while I was kind of putting this topic together today by Albert Einstein, which is, any fool can know, the point is to understand. And so, yeah, you may know roughly like what's involved with a car dealership, and selling a car. Like you might be able to observe as a third party, but do you actually understand? So do you know about the little nuances involved in selling a car? Like what are the actual pain points? Because when you understand those specific pain points, those real little nuances and those little details, that's where you start to produce a really interesting product. Because ultimately, if I just said, well, I'm going to apply the basic, we'll say CRUD version of software. So create, read, update, delete. Like basically, I'm taking what used to be a piece of paper, like a paper form, and I'm translating that on the screen. That's one way to solve that problem. But if I really understand how car dealerships work, like maybe you have problems with the way that you have to collect new customer information or something like that. So immediately I can say like, well, it'd be cool if we knew someone was interested in buying a car. We could send something to them the night before to collect that information. And that's coming from somebody who has no idea about this stuff. So if you think about, oh, wow, okay, I have actual experience with this, you'd be able to run with an idea like that and really build it out. And so that can be kind of cumbersome, and it can be frustrating too, because you're like, well, but there's nothing that I'm an expert at. And ultimately, all I can say to that is suck it up. Like, nobody owes you the ability to work on one of these. So if it's something where you want to do it, but you don't have any experience, go get experience. Go do it. If you want to build software for managing, a woodworking shop, go work in a woodworking shop. It doesn't really matter what it is, but if you're going to try and solve problems involving, because generally speaking, software has to do with logistics and organizational type matters. If you're trying to build a piece of software that does those things in a given domain, make sure that you understand the domain. And you don't have to be like a 10, 20-year lifelong expert, but at least take some time. Take a few months, take a few years to really go get yourself involved in it at the level where somebody using the software would be experiencing it. So an idea that comes to mind. So twice a week I go and I do powerlifting at a gym near my home. And there's a stark difference between me, the beginner, and I say beginner, I've been doing it for about a year now, but I still fit into that beginner category, versus the owner of the gym, who is a genius when it comes to this stuff. Like, he sees details, and the coaches that are there see details that I wouldn't know about because I haven't done it long enough. I haven't experienced it long enough. And so they can help me in different ways. Now, if I task them with creating software, well, they'd be able to say, like some people, like myself, I struggle a lot with certain movements and certain, what do you call that? What is that? I can't think of the term. It's the way that you do it. This is a terrible explanation, but basically, I don't have a really good grasp on what sorts of things to look for to tell me whether or not somebody is moving well or not moving well. And so, if I was going to build software to manage a gym or to manage the clients of a gym, well, I would probably want to be able to keep track of a certain person's little nuances. So it's like, oh, well, this person is really good at stretching in this way, and this person is not. And so if I don't have experience in the area, I wouldn't even know to think about that. That wouldn't register in my brain. So when it comes to building your own product, you gotta have some experience. You can't just go out here. And that plays into vision because, well, if you know what's going on, you're going to be able to see some ideal future that doesn't exist today in that context. And if you can't, well, your solutions are pretty much just going to be generic. It's not going to be something that people really get excited about or going to be eager to give you money for, because most likely the solution already exists. But if it's something where you have really specific knowledge, you're going to be able to build something that will match the needs of a niche audience and really deliver something great. So it's worth considering. Like, if you don't have experience with something, definitely try and figure out what it is. And kind of playing into this whole thing is this idea of knowing who you're building for. So it's not just having an understanding for the problem at hand, but it's also knowing like who or what is the problem that I'm solving. Because it's super easy to get into this trap of, Well, it's for everybody. Or it's for, everybody within some slightly more narrow thing. But it's not hyper specific. It's not like this is who it's for and no one else. And so a good example of this, I love drinking coffee. I drink coffee every day. And one of the examples that I use to explain this to folks is the difference between the McDonald's McCafe coffee versus Starbucks, and then versus like a higher end retailer like La Colombe. So you have all of these different versions of the same exact thing. And so you need to know when you're building your product, well, which segment are you going after? What's the specific type of customer? What's the specific market that you're going after? Because if you don't, it's going to be very hard to come up with a vision for your product. And the reason why is that, well, certain markets or certain types of customers are going to respond to certain details. They're going to respond to certain things in the product differently than other customers. So a good example of that would be maybe somebody who shops at, I don't know, we'll say Target. So Target is just like a generic, I'm forgetting all the words today, department store. So they have clothes. It's not bad clothes. It's not, like necessarily cheap clothes or anything like that, but they just have like generally generic types of clothing. So I can go there and I could say, yeah, I want some pants and a t-shirt, and I can look relatively decent, and it works out, and I don't spend a lot of money. Contrast that with a slightly higher end retailer. So you go to somewhere that they specify in or specialize in t-shirts and jeans and stuff like that, like maybe Levi's. So if I go to a Levi's store, well, I'm more likely to find a really detailed, well-crafted pair of jeans more so than I am if I go to Target. I can get the same exact product, but those two retailers or those two contexts have a different focus. So Target is kind of like, well, you can get a coat here, you can get some coffee here, and you can get a t-shirt here, and maybe you can get a toy for your kid. Versus Levi's, it's like, no, we only sell jeans and shirts. And so the difference being that the vision for those two companies or those two products, if you want to think about it in that way, is completely different. And so it's no different when it comes to you building a software product. You need to know, okay, who is this for and who is it not for? Because once you know who it's for and not for, you're able to develop a vision long term of what sort of things or what sort of problems you're going to be willing to solve versus which sort of problems you're not. And so a certain type of customer is going to have different problems than another customer. It's that simple. And more than just the problems being solved, this will also influence how you market and sell the product. So going back to the McCafe versus Starbucks versus La Colombe, McCafe is like, you look like you could use a cup of coffee. Starbucks is, well, like maybe it's a little more high end. Like maybe you're feeling yummy and you want something a little sweeter, and maybe you want to feel good about yourself in the process. And then so the third example I use is La Colombe, which is like a high end coffee place here in Chicago, and they're more focused on the actual coffee itself. They're like, well, you want a really well-crafted cup of coffee. And so all of those three are solving different problems. They're all three going to give you coffee, but they're all going to sell it to you in a different way, which will resonate with you in a different way and decide whether or not you actually give them your money and buy the thing. And so it's important to keep that in mind. It's not always just going to be, oh, well, I'm building software for car dealerships. What kind of car dealerships? Are you doing it for used car dealerships? Are you doing it for a Ferrari dealership? Are you doing it? And that's what I'm getting at. All of those things start to introduce different details. Oh, well, somebody who's buying a Ferrari probably isn't going to mind spending an extra few $100 on like really nice floor mats and maybe like a detail job on the interior. Whereas somebody who is going to buy a used car is just like, fuck it, just make it work. I just want to get to my job and back home safely. And so you got to factor that in. You got to think about that when you're building your product. Like, what is the type of person and what is the packaging or the idea that's going to resonate with them? Because ultimately, that decides where you're going to steer the product long term. Now, up until this point, we've been talking quite a bit about the product, like the intangible kind of things, or like the things outside of you as the person working on the product. But it's also important to consider yourself. So, and this took me a long time to figure out. And I used to get really anxious and frustrated when I would want to build some type of product, but the way that I would need to build that product and run that product was completely different from how I wanted to live my life. And so, unfortunately, and this is like, I should underscore unfortunately here, you hear this term, the lifestyle product or something like that, where it gets kind of bastardized that you want to work on a lifestyle product. And if you're not familiar with the term, a lifestyle product is one that's not the traditional startup where you have hundreds of employees and a sales team and t-shirts and, like somebody with a really cool haircut is always walking around talking about, like really, they say like, well, my vision, like that type of vibe versus, I just want to have some extra cash laying around and, give a good life to my family. And so the lifestyle is that latter version where it's like, I just want to have a good life. And I think that gets bastardized quite a bit. Like you get people who are kind of looking down upon people who want to live that, but there's nothing wrong with that. And I think this plays into the greater vision for the product, which is the type of product that you choose to build is ultimately going to dictate how you have to live your life. And this is a little bit abstract, so kind of stay on board with me here. The idea is that if I'm going to build a product that's a little more hands-off, meaning, once I build the initial version, save for like basic maintenance tasks, like maybe, if we get really geeky, like updating the dependencies or maybe increasing the size of the database or the number of servers that the application uses, save for those things, generally the product's going to take care of itself. It's less about the day-to-day maintenance and getting customers on board. It's kind of like I put it into the marketplace, people see it and they're like, yep, that's what I need, and they buy it and it just kind of takes care of itself. Versus a different type of product where it's like I talked about, like you have to have hundreds of people to manage it and you have to have a sales team, and if you don't have a sales team then the product's not going to work and all that stuff. Both of those types of products need a different personality behind the scenes running them. And so if you think about, well, the product that's a little more hands-off, that's a great fit for somebody who's introverted, somebody who's like, you know what, I just want to wake up like 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, check my email, maybe respond to a few customers, and then go do something else for the day. So it's still a successful product, it still runs, but it facilitates a different lifestyle. Versus the one where I have to have a big team and salespeople and all that stuff, that requires a little more involvement. So the personality that's going to be running that type of business or that type of product is someone who might be a little more charismatic. They might be a little more excited. They might want to do things like meetings and manage people and cultivate a culture of a company. They might like those things. And so those differences in how the company is going to work play into your own life and ultimately the vision for the product. Because if you're going to desire a life where you're going to be left alone and you're going to have more control over your time as a result of working on this product, well, you want to make sure that the vision you have in mind for your product isn't the one that's going to necessitate a sales team. You're not going to want to have to put all this money and time into it if that's not the life you want to live. And I unfortunately see people working on stuff like this where it's, I'm more of like a closeted geek type. I like to read my books and be quiet, but I'm going to build this thing that needs me to be constantly talking to customers and out and about. And there's a noticeable friction there. And it's one of those things like, yeah, you might be perfectly qualified to solve the problem or build the software, but it doesn't really align with how you want to live your life and the type of person that you want to be. And so that, again, it's a little more abstract, but it's important to consider that you, in a lot of ways, are the product. And so you want to factor yourself into the equation. Don't just blindly say, like, yeah, I'm going to go work on this thing, because you might get into a situation where early on everything's fine, but 5 years out and 10 years out, where you're like really seriously involved in the product and the thing is running, you might have an existential crisis and say, like, oh shit, I don't like this. I don't want to be this person. But now you're kind of saddled with this responsibility and expectation that you're gonna be that person even if you don't want to be. So it's worth considering up front, like, well, where do I want my life to go? Who do I want to be? And not just kind of blindly jumping into something that may conflict with that. So I think we've covered a lot of the big ideas, but there's two more that I want to discuss before we wrap up here. And one is more of a way to cure the overwhelm. So I'm sure a lot of you are listening and you're like, but you're not giving me specific tips on how to make a vision. And the reason I'm not is because I can't. And the reason I can't is because every vision is ideally or hopefully unique. It's something that you see in your head. It's an idea, a thought. It's something that you said, oh man, that'd be cool. And then you pursue it. It's not something where I can say, follow these 10 steps and you're going to have magical ideas. It's impossible. You have to think. You have to be creative. You have to believe in some idea and then pursue it. And where a lot of people get overwhelmed with that thought or that idea is, oh, well, but I don't know where this is going to go. And the reality is you're never going to really know. You're going to know a little bit out into the future. Maybe you can see a point in the future, but you're not going to know all of the details involved to get you to your vision. You're just not. But what's cool, and this is something that takes some time to get comfortable with, but filter it through whatever lens you want. Maybe a religious lens or like a cosmic hippy-dippy lens, doesn't really matter. But ultimately, once you start down a path, and you see a vision, like a point that you want to get to, as long as you keep showing up and doing what you need to do, and again, just starting like we talked about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So as long as I go to the store and get the bread, I'm going to figure out how to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And you have to believe that. You have to go in saying, I'm going to fill in the blanks as I go. I don't know everything. I don't know all the steps that are involved for me to accomplish that vision that I want, but you're just going to trust that, okay, eventually I'm going to get there. And that sounds like absolute bullshit. It's not like, well, how do you know that? The only way I know it is from experience. You know, when like just kind of going back, not talking about products, but talking about how I've gotten to the point where I'm talking to you today and I get to do what I do every day. When I started, I was in the basement of a house in a small farm town, and I had the idea that like, well, I don't want to be doing the job I was doing at the time, so screw it, I'm going to go start building websites the way that I think websites should be built. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about building websites, like marketing websites. And slowly but surely, I said, well, I want to be really, really good at building websites. I want to do this stuff really well. I didn't know that I was going to end up here. Like, if you would have gone back roughly 10 years now and told me, like, hey, guess what you're going to be doing? Never would have guessed this. But the thing that I knew that I wanted to do is I wanted to be really good at building websites. That's all I knew. And so as time progressed, I started to see different things. And as I got more and more experience, different things came into focus for me that allowed me to get to this point. The same exact thing happens when it comes to a product idea. It's not where, okay, you sit down on day one and you have this magical, this is why I absolutely crack up at business plans that are super detailed. Cause it's like, no, that's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen exactly like that, because strap in and wait. Like, you just don't know. You gotta say, okay, on day one, well, I want to build really good software for managing a car dealership. Okay, where do you think you should start? And then you start, and that's it. And you don't have any expectation of getting that end result in a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years. You just say, I'm going to move toward that point, and I'm not going to stop. And so a great example of this is Elon Musk. So consider that at this point in time, there is a group of people that are not affiliated with the government that can send rockets into space and then land them back on the ground, as well as on a barge floating in the middle of the ocean. Really contemplate that for a second, and then realize that that was at some point in time a vision in Elon Musk's head. Now, do you think that when he started, he knew exactly how that was going to work? Exactly the steps involved. He had a detailed plan, like, okay, here's day 1 versus day 10,000, whatever it is. Do you think that he had that mapped out? And the answer is, of course not. And that's the point. What he saw was, I want to send rockets into space and make them reusable by being able to land them back on the ground, doing maintenance, and then sending them back up. That's it. That's the vision. Now, getting to that point, you have to kind of start back at the beginning. It's like, well, if I was in his shoes and I had that idea and I really wanted to do that, I would say, well, what don't you understand? It's like, well, I don't even know how to build a rocket. All right, go and figure out how to build a rocket. And if memory serves, I don't know if I heard this in an interview with him or it was a book about him or something like that, but I distinctly remember this, which was when he wanted to build a rocket, he went and found like old Russian rocket manuals. Like he found them, I don't know where he got them, but he went and got copies of old Russian rocket manuals, and he even went to Russia to try and buy some of their old rockets. Like he said, like, well, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to kind of follow the clues. I'm going to think about how do I do that? Again, going to Russia to buy rockets or reading books and like manuals about rockets is not landing rockets on the ground or on a barge in the middle of the ocean, but it's going to get you on the path to where you want to get. And so your software is no different. Now, there's one gotcha here, and this is like the gotcha. This is the thing that if you can't do this, then it's not going to work, which is once you have your vision and you're really convinced of it, you're really like, yes, I believe that that's possible, and I'm the person that can make it happen, you cannot stop. And by stop, I don't just mean stopping in the sense of like you give up on the idea, but I also mean stopping in allowing your focus to shift. So if your focus is to send rockets into space and then land them back on the ground, you absolutely cannot say, oh, well, I want to land rockets on the ground that I just launched into space, 10 minutes earlier. But I also want to build a really good chain of beef sandwich restaurants. Like you can't do that. You got to focus. You got to say, this is what I'm doing. This is the vision that I have. This is the problem that I'm solving. If you can't do that for an extended amount of time, and when I say extended amount of time, and if you've been following anything that I've done, I always say this, years and years and years and years and years. You're dedicating yourself to the vision. You're dedicating yourself to fulfilling whatever it is you see in your head. It's not going to be, oh, well, I guess I'm going to, be a multimillionaire super genius that lands rockets on the ground. But if I can't do it in 6 months, then guess it's not for me. Bullshit. You can't do that. You have to say, I'm going to get there. And then you go there no matter what. I don't care if someone tells you you're stupid. I don't care if you run out of money. I don't care what it is. You have to follow through. You have to say, that's where I'm going, and I'm going there no matter what. And you factor out everything else that's going to get in your way. And the big one is people. So I like, well, if people don't agree with me, then what's going to happen? It's like, it doesn't matter. Focus. Go do the thing that you set out to do and get it done. And that's what separates the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs and all of those folks from everybody else, is that they said, yeah, I'm going to go there. And then they basically started, and they went, and they figured it out as they went, and everybody else followed behind them. They said, like, nope, I'm going there. If you want to come along, great, hop on board, but otherwise leave me alone. I'm going to do this. And you do it. And that's it. Now, again, revolutionizing personal computers or inventing personal computers and landing rockets on the ground are extreme examples. Building your own software, like probably more in the like 2 to 3 year range. So it's not like you're having to spend a decade on this just to get to an initial result. But if you do want to be successful, you do have to commit to some extent to a long-term strategy, and you have to focus. You can't just kind of like wander off in 50 million different directions and expect to get somewhere. You have to really hone in on what it is that you want, see it, and go after it, and don't stop until you get it. So that's it. That's the way that I think about vision, and hopefully that will help you to form visions about where you want to go and the type of products that you want to build. Because again, I can't give you the specific ideas. Now, if we have a conversation or wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you want to sign up for mentorship, maybe then it's a little easier for me to help you once I have some context of what you're doing. But outside of that, you just have to consider these things. And so let's kind of rewind here. So first and foremost, why are you doing it? Is it a problem that actually affects you and something that you want to solve that's going to improve your life? Or is it something that you're just going to do it because it might be a good business? So that's one. Two is, do you actually understand the problem? So do you have the domain expertise to say, I'm the right person to solve this? So the example we used here was building software for a car dealership. Well, if you don't have experience selling cars or running a car dealership, probably shouldn't be involved building software for car dealerships. It's not that you can't, but the end result that you're going to get is going to be of a lot lesser quality than it will be if you have that domain expertise. Having a specific purpose and audience in mind. So knowing who you're going after, because you can't go after everybody. And I meant to say this earlier, but there's a really good quote story about this. There's a book called Setting the Table by, it's a restaurateur named Danny Meyer from New York. And there's a story about him. I think he's opening his first restaurant. And I want to say it was his uncle and him were having a conversation. And his uncle was asking, like, well, what type of restaurant are you going to open? And he's like, well, we're going to have this type of wine. We're going to have these type of dishes. And we're going to have this. And we're going to have that. And his uncle says, stop. And he's like, you have to be specific. You can't just have a restaurant with everything. You have to be specific. He's like, people go out for Italian. They don't go out for eclectic. And you want to keep that in mind when it comes to your product and your audience. You're going for something hyper-specific. You're not going after, oh, well, everybody can use this. It's not going to work out. You're going to be moving in 50 different directions, trying to please all these different people, and it's going to fail. It's not going to work. Next is thinking about where you want to be individually. So realizing that your product is going to have an influence on your life, either directly or indirectly. And so as you build it, or even before you build it, you want to consider what type of life do you want to lead, and how is the product that you build or the products that you build going to influence the outcome of that life, or where you end up personally in your own life. And then ultimately, fill in the blanks as you go. Okay? You're not going to know where you're going. You're not going to know where this ends up. But just see the vision, hold it in your head, and then start. And just do it. Don't worry about all the details in between the vision and today. Just sit down and go and do it. Don't worry about it. The things that you need will come to you. The ideas will come. The resources will come. You just got to trust that and go do it. And then ultimately, don't stop. Have that laser focus on that future point and work toward it. And don't stop until you get there. And trust that it'll all work out. You'll figure it out. And so far, from all the examples I've seen of people doing that, it's worked out just fine. Does that mean that the product that you build is going to be a grand slam knockout success? No. And so kind of a closing thought here is you have to have a willingness to constantly tweak your vision. Meaning, let me rephrase that. So not tweak your vision, but tweak how you get to your vision. Because it's very easy to come up with a solution that looks like it's solving the problem, but it's not. And so you have to, and this is where that commitment and dedication to the vision comes in. You might come up with some kind of like, it's half-working version of it, but that's not the best you can do. And so you have to be willing to keep iterating and working toward that ultimate vision that you have in mind. Like the one that you're like, that's damn near perfect. And so if you can do that and you can focus over the long term, it's more likely that you're going to get there. But you have to get comfortable with that not knowing and being willing to kind of iterate and change. Not necessarily pivot, but move toward that point, shifting the how of how you get there as you go. So that's going to do it for this week, folks. Hopefully that was helpful and that was insightful, and it'll get you on a better path to figuring out what the vision for your product is. So as always, thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, definitely leave comments. If you're listening to this on SoundCloud, definitely leave comments. And if you have any other ideas or thoughts or, pushback or anything like that around this episode, definitely let me know. Send a tweet to @CLVRBGL on Twitter, and I'd be glad to have a conversation with you. So thanks for listening, folks, and I'll talk to you next week.